Hello, everyone, and welcome to Canadians with Disabilities and their Allies. My name is Brent Frain. I'm the host. The show is also known as PWD Allies Podcast. Today is a very special day. It's the 100th episode. And wow, I mean, I just can't believe that this year's gone by so fast. And to have the 100th episode, I have Cheryl Hardcastle joining me for the 100th episode on YouTube, and prior Cheryl was the 100th episode guest actually on Twitter Space when I used to have it on Twitter Space. So it's such a great pleasure to having Cheryl joining me amongst basically my other panelists that are joining me today too. And I want to thank everyone for joining in on the comments section. Send us your comments. We'll do our very best to get to each and every question that comes in. I want to make sure everybody's included in today's episode as much as possible. And also, we're going to be diving into a lot of different topics, so follow through with us. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed our new intro that we have for this for today's episode too.
Yeah, we did one for the VIPs, and then I'll probably put one together for when we have the panelist group discussions. I'll put one for the panelist.
Nice.
So
you need a Patreon.
I want to. I just want to interrupt everybody for a second. I wanted to slide in because this is the 100th episode and this is a big deal. I actually have an appointment I have to run to, and I'm hoping that I can get to the appointment and maybe rush back and slide in the end. Now that I've
we're only going to be on for about an hour though. That's the other new thing.
Well, I know
happening.
I realize that.
Yeah,
I realize that, but it is possible I might be able to slide in for a few minutes at the end. I don't know. But I just wanted to let you all know, like, I just wanted to, like, I'm really excited that this is the 100th episode.
Yeah.
I
this
really
is
wanted
fantastic.
to show up, and I know I started before we went live. I think I started a little bit of a,
Well, that's kind of what we always.
Storm.
There's so much that is on the cutting room floor all the time, right? Right, Brent?
Yeah.
Before we roll
absolutely. As we go along with the podcast, we find ways of tweaking things here and there. And when we say, like I say, an hour for like the show, if it goes for like a few minutes, kind of give or take a little buffer, but we're gonna do our very best to try to keep it streamlined across, and just makes it more even. Right,
yeah, because we were getting comments and they're valid, and I was thinking about this for a while actually. It didn't need to have the comments to happen for me to think this is that even at 1 hour, that's a huge viewer commitment for people to sit there for an hour and watch an hour-long YouTube video. Mm-hmm. And by the time you get to 2 or 3 hours, it's a lot of viewer fatigue, right? And we just want to make sure that when we put a show together, that we're really putting a nice concise package together, and that people will want to sit through the whole hour. But if they see something that's 2 hours or 3 hours, it's like, I don't know if I want to sit through all that.
Well, today's show,
you got to break them down when they get.
Well, for today's show, we got going just a few minutes late, so we'll make it today. We'll make it till 2:30 today, and then and after that, just kind of be fair to everybody and give everybody time to.
Well, that's 3:30 my time.
That's right.
There you go. Alberta time.
Well, I am going to. I got a book out now, guys. But cross your I'm crossing my fingers that I can just kind of rush and get back and slide in for the end. And
don't miss the cake. Don't miss the cake.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to miss the cake. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll see you all in a bit.
I'll put
Okay.
the candles on the top, make sure that they're not Roman candles or anything like that.
Yeah. Mm.
Right on. Well, I'm going to start with Cheryl to kick it off here.
Yeah.
Cheryl, this is a fantastic episode, and it's always happy to have you on.
Yeah, opening minds for the 100th episode now for PWD and Allies. So I'm glad to be back, and I think we should just delve right in. You've got some really anxious people to share, so that the podcast is compelling. And I guess I'll start off with, just because of the BC budget announcement, it just brought me to thinking about the whole idea across the nation, how the effect or the ramifications, if you will, of the announcement of the development of a Canada Disability benefit, and how it's affecting the provinces, and how it seems that they're waiting. The initiatives aren't there. They're waiting to see what's going to happen. I feel like that's the height of frustration for people that are
we see the photo ops and come out doing the Twitter photo ops and all this, and what it translates to us is they're more interested in the appearance on social media than they are of the brass tack in the action of moving the goalposts forward to an obtainable, like, in our minds as disabled people, we're going like, is this benefit ever going to come to fruition in our lifetime? Because like a lot of us are close to 50, if not over 50, and a lot of us are going to be at the point where come 65 we won't even be eligible for this benefit. So where's the progress? And all we see is the photo ops. Like, look at us, we're doing kind stuff for people, and we don't actually see the meat and potatoes behind the doors. Anyway, that's kind of my feeling on it.
Yeah, we'll get into comments in a little bit there, Ellen. I'll take turns and kind of chime into and feedback to Cheryl. But yeah, thanks on that. Yeah, I mean, it just seems like, I mean, I've talked to neighbors around too, and they kind of echo what you mentioned, Ellen, too. It's a lot of like talk, but action, and I think you're right, Cheryl. I mean, a lot of people are very desperate to hear, like, let's get the Canada effort going. And
that brings it brings up other issues with it too, but we know the announcements, and we know when they're talking about, they being the federal government bodies that are, trying to put this regulation onto paper, and how this relationship with a federal benefit how is it going to interact with each province. We all know how it differs amongst the provinces, but you do not want this to be considered an income that impacts social assistance that you're getting in your province. And they're saying that it's June of 2025 before we have these regulations down. That's the frustrating part, because then it brings up a whole other issue that gets pushed aside in many ways, and that is of an interim support, an interim benefit. While you're waiting for these regulations to be hammered out, the federal government responsibility to people that are living in deep legislated poverty, you already identified that a Canada Disability benefit is needed, and until you get this regulation fleshed out, which is now June 2025, what do we do in the interim? There is room for interim support, and that can be done. But what happens is it sort of splinters off, and whatever else grabs a headline, right?
Well, as you were saying, as you were saying too, Cheryl, before we launched the show, I mean, I think that's why a lot of provinces are just sitting on their hands too, because the provinces are waiting for the benefit too. So they're like, well, we don't want to release anything until we know. So they're like, well, we'll just $0 is fine, and until we know, until we know in a year and a half, we'll just sit on our hands and wait.
Yeah. What financial commitment do we make if the federal government's going to make this commitment?
Yeah. So it kind of puts it in limbo where people are now wondering, well, why am I left behind in the budget? Well, it's like the devil's in the detail, because now it's like, well, the feds probably promised saying, hey, we're going to get it out by this time. And so when the provinces make their budget, they do things accordingly based on what the feds have actually told them. And now the feds are now dragging their heels and don't want to put a DERB out in the meantime, because apparently it's not fiscally responsible, I guess, right now, or something like that. I don't know, but yeah.
You know the whole thing. We're not worthy. We're not worthy. We're not worthy.
But
turns out we're actually not worthy.
One of my concerns too is it's about the clawbacks too.
Yeah, that's true
from
too.
Feds versus to the provincial government. So I know that the MP Mike Maurice had gone through the committee stage, and he was able to successfully get an agreement saying that they won't be clawing that back. But now it's like he's hearing that maybe they're gonna make basically the DTC as part of the criteria for eligibility. He's hoping not that they will not do that, because I guess the agreement was that no, that wasn't part of the agreement. So who knows, right? I really hope not.
What says the basic income guy? I was just going to go to you.
Before we got going, Minnie was talking about, and also on clawbacks, my late girlfriend, she was on disability, and she got this 600, but then of course it was all clawed back, or the 300 was all clawed back over her checks. So between that and this kind of silence, I was just writing this down, like the ignoring and the blocking on Twitter that you see makes people understandably worried about what this final goalpost will look like. You know, so it's like, not only are you sitting in legislated poverty now, but you're like I remember Joseph was talking about the different things that the CDB could possibly be in the end. So that doesn't exactly do the heart a lot of good. And then you have, this MP ignoring and doing these other things when that's the one person that should be responding. There's one person I just saw yesterday. I was talking to a friend on Twitter, and she's like, "Oh, this person blocked me because I was trying to talk to her." And I looked over, and she blocked me as well. I'd never talked to this person before at all. And it's just, because association or whatever, she went, "Well, stop him." So.
But the thing with Twitter, so with me on my Twitter, I post exactly what the policy of ODSP says and how to leave ODSP through work. For me, it's self-employment. I run my small business, and I want to have too much money that disability says I'm rich. Because I got on disability in my 20s. You're telling me I'm supposed to stay poor until I turn 65. You know how much years of investments don't get invested if I don't make that effort? That I don't do something with the money I have, not just make it, spend it, go into debt. I have to make it, spend it, invest it for my future. So when I'm getting people on my Twitter, like I had this city person message me. I eventually found out she's someone on my Facebook, and we had a conversation, and she's harassing me. I'm like, look, this is what the documents of ODSP says. This is when they said it. This is when they update it. They'll change something in the policy, and they're not going to tell you they changed it. You have to go to the website and look for the update, look for the published date, look for when it started, look for when it's going on and what's going on today. And then if you're not working, you literally have nothing else to do. But if you're working and trying to better yourself, you have 600 things you're thinking about. So when I block people on Twitter, I don't have time for your little whiny no job business in my thing. I'm trying to get off a system. I know exactly how the system screws me over, how it squeezes me, how it makes me scared. I have a little caseworker telling me nonsense with their little opinion. I don't need that. So the divide is either you're working as much as you can, disabled and all, or you're disabled and not working, and you need to keep quiet and stay in the corner. That is how it's separated. And I get why they're not doing it, because if more people are getting their fixed income for a long period of time, they get bitter.
Yeah, but it's like I said before too, Brent. It's like you've worked before for quite a while. I worked for 20 years. My previous wife worked for almost 20 years. And so I'm somebody and you're somebody, and there's a lot of people like us out there that did try to better ourselves, and we did get good jobs, and they did pay good benefits. But it pisses me off when our provincial governments turn around and say, you know what, the survivor's pension, we're just going to ignore that and claw it back as unearned income because you didn't actually really earn that, and it's like, I think one of the key pieces that I'm always on the provincial governments for here in BC and elsewhere across Canada is they really have to respect the whole adage for me of income is income is income is income. Like, just because if you say that a survivor's pension is invalid income, it automatically, when you cherry pick and say that a survivor's pension is not valid income, that is discriminatory. It just is. I don't care if my BC Human Rights Tribunal says it's not discrimination. It is discrimination. I could have 1,000 people line up from human rights tribunals and tell me it's not discrimination. It is discrimination. Point. That's end of story.
Well, I mean, I'll give you a quick, just a very, very quick example. Okay, so in BC, we have deposits now that are on milk containers. Yeah, there never used to be before, but now there is. And now you get charged an environmental fee on top of that. So now it just compounds, right? So I mean, so anyway, so you start collecting them. You get a bag, a garbage bag, and you start throwing them and rinse it out, throw it in there, some pop cans or juice containers or whatever. So now you pile them all up and you say, we've already paid that deposit. So now you go and take it to the recycle depot. So you go and get your money back. And now the government expects you to declare that because it's actually, you've made the money. So you put it on your declaration form. The government now takes it off you because it's classified as unearned income. Mm-hmm. And you've already paid that money and off your actual check.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. Yeah, it makes no sense.
And the person probably, not to mention the time it took for them to collect the bottles, but they probably paid a bunch of bus fare to go and collect the bottles and deposit it. But it's like, we don't care about your bus fare that you spent. It's still unearned income. We're going to take away from you.
Everything is about the gross domestic product. Everything is about productivity, income in the economy, paying taxes. I don't know where we're acting like it's not about, it's always about the government, how to get their taxes, whether it's lower government, provincial government getting their taxes, or the federal government getting their taxes.
The tax man.
And then just your money sitting in your bank account that gains interest, you pay taxes on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if the little 15 cents of interest from whatever high interest bank account that you're in, that's it. Like, everything is about funneling back to the government and paying taxes.
Mm-hmm. But
there was a guy at the ODSP office today that was very upset, and I didn't catch 100% of the conversation. I'd walked in, he was at the counter already. I just went in because I couldn't log into the portal. Every time I did, it gave me an error, and I was like, okay, I need to see my worker regarding a mattress situation, and if those things were still covered in my region. So that was one reason I had gone in, only to find out they had switched workers on me because my worker had left. But this guy was really upset because he started a small business last summer in Kingston, and he got a bunch of restaurants and retail stores downtown to pay him a service fee to wash the outside of his windows, especially when the weather got really bad and the salt was being sprayed up. He had a whole cleaning kit that he put together. And he said, I'm getting clawed back more than I'm actually getting paid by these companies who want me to be a contributor to society. I tried to start my own business, and I must have sit on my couch because I'm more behind the 8 ball before I started. Now, I felt bad for the guy because he was like, I could tell he was like literally distraught. That he said, like, despite my best efforts to not be lazy, not to be on the system, completely relying on it, but actually doing something with my time, and I'm punishedly, punitively attacked every time. And I felt for him because I understand, especially being audited by ODSP for CERB, I felt his pain. I was just like, oh, buddy, I totally get it. Like, I know that if I go get a dishwashing job or I go stock shelves or whatever, that there are going to be clawbacks if I go over the amount. I've already calculated for that. I'm assuming that they're going to claw back. But when you're starting a small business and you just want to get a little bit ahead and have some extra groceries so that you're eating healthier, only to have the amount that you just earned as a self-employed person, it's like a slap in the face.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that story. I'm going to pass the mic over to Cheryl, just some feedback on that. And over to, go ahead.
I think it goes, I think now this all goes back to no matter what people are doing, if you're starting your own business or whatever it is, and it's getting clawed back, what the big, and it's not even an elephant in the room, it's very obvious, because isn't an elephant in the room supposed to mean like it's subtle and not spoken about?
It's a herd of elephants.
It's the
unicorns.
If you're living, like, this is below poverty level.
Mm-hmm.
You're below poverty level, and that is the kind of policy that you're implementing, that you're adhering to, is for people who are already living below poverty.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for some people that have shared with me their anecdotes as well, it's just as important for them when they're, if they get it clawed back, they've accepted the amount they get clawed back. They have an ability to work to a certain extent. And you've got to be collecting at least $1 to be able to get the other in-kind services that you need for social assistance. Here in Ontario, anyway, I'm not sure how much it deviates for those of you that are in other provinces, but to have dental and vision, even though it's not a lot, you have some of these in-kind social assistance benefits. I'll call them benefits right now, but you don't get them if you're at zero.
Mm-hmm.
So you need that $1 to keep you there. And the struggle, if you don't know how to navigate this system, it kind of goes back to this idea of being able to advocate for yourself and navigate this system and learn about, like, not everybody can grasp all of that, and they're learning as they go and get screwed over, I guess is how I'll say it. But people get overwhelmed and they just can't function. The stress level already that people are under, it's so much that to add something to it, and it goes back to, like, going back again to talking about the CBD and talking about this regulatory environment that's going to be enshrined. And, like, I really hope they address that issue of, how many times do I have to prove a disability? And besides this issue of clawback, what I want to know as a taxpayer as well is, what happens to that money in my province when it's clawed back from somebody that's already living in need? There's a lot of taxpayers that don't want to see someone living below the poverty line. I'm not even talking about at the poverty line, right? We're talking about deep below. But what happens when that money is clawed back? Where does that go? Does it go back to the federal government, or does it go into a provincial coffer? That's still very unclear to me, because what happens for each person when it's clawed back, you get mired in the, oh, you know, this is exempt and that's not exempt. And we start talking about how the policy works for people that are living in under poverty. But what about, where does that money go as like just as a follow through on the whole exercise? Where is that going?
Well, I'm thinking that it probably goes into general revenue.
Exactly. And does this, so on the backs of somebody who's already living below the poverty line, now we are talking about how almost near impossible. Listen to the rhetoric that we hear about this Canada Disability Benefit and how hard it's going to be to get these regulations. Well, when you have you've got to have that political will and that courage to come up first and say, we're going to bring people above the poverty line. How much above the poverty line? 1%? 2%? No one's even committed. It's the wording that they have now is, I think it's to reduce poverty.
Yeah.
Instead of
elimination.
You're still struggling. What we all know this too. We have, when people that are struggling with inflation and the cost of groceries, no matter where you're at, if you're working, like, people do not have a cushion, right? So now, when it comes to someone who's living below the poverty line, can we at least not identify that in a clear and succinct statement? There is not one. It's been avoided. Are you going to commit to bringing people to a level that is above the poverty line? And how far above the poverty line? I know that's regional, but that's no excuse to not say what the aspiration is. At least that hasn't even been identified. So that's really concerning, and that's really frustrating when people are trying to eat healthy, trying to, whatever grocery stores you have at your avail where you live. I feel sorry for people that have no choice but to access a certain type of, corporation that provides groceries, and you just got to buy what they have. You can't look for deals anywhere, which is a whole other career for people. So that's the part that I really find like extremely frustrating and concerning. When all of all this good stuff that it's going to come, you have to be patient. It's going to come. What's going to come? Is someone please commit to here's the poverty line, and we're going to bring you above it. There's not even an attempt to say we're going to bring you to it.
Right.
And the other worry too is a lot of people with disabilities are going, what's coming first? The expansion of MAiD, where I'm coerced as a impoverished Canadian into the MAiD channel, or am I gonna see the disability benefit actually like give me some breathing room? And that's the coercion of, hey, we're not gonna support you, but we'll give you a lethal injection instead is really a scary prospect.
Well, I had two comments, and I wanted to get Cheryl's feedback on one of them. The first one is, I don't like the whole idea of the rob Peter to pay Paul idea. So I get the clawback so that somebody else can get a subsidy, right? Like I'm just as bad off as somebody else, probably worse, but somehow I deserve a clawback, but somebody else working at McDonald's for 8 hours or whatever, they get the subsidy, right? That's point number one. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is there's been so many articles in BC here just in the last few days in the lead up to the budget unveil, and everybody is talking about as Minnie was saying, everybody's paying a tax, and this whole idea of the gross domestic product, right? Well, there's been so many articles recently about saying that the gross domestic product of BC has just basically gone right down the toilet, because you got so many like the population is skyrocketing, but all our jobs now are converting from full-time employment of good jobs. They're all getting like part-time hours at crappy wages now.
The precariat, yeah.
And so you have the big CEOs are making the money. Oh yeah. I was saying before we launched, Brent, I shared the story of that I used to work for RBC.
That's right.
And the Royal Bank of Canada. Let's state that again. Here. Royal Bank of Canada, and I was the tech support for all of the branches all across the whole country. All across Canada, I was the tech support. They would call in, the branches would call in, but because the CEOs wanted to save the money, they shipped all of the tech support over to India. Right. And I mean, that to me is corruption right there, where the CEOs value profit way more than they value Canadian citizens and making Canadian citizens' lives better. It's like, well, we don't care if we screw over Canadians. We care about the bottom dollar, and it's like we don't care if we ship everything over to India. It's fine.
Neil,
it's not just.
Yeah, Alan, hang on, just for 1 second. I'm just going to turn the mic over to Tom here for a minute, just to get Tom's feedback into.
And
then we'll turn over to you, Alan, after.
And Minnie, she's also got her hand up.
Yeah.
Right now I'm going through Guy Standing, who's my kind of hero in the basic income movement. He's a labor economist, and there's so many. I could just go rambling on. I'll try to keep it as succinct as I can. Right now I'm reading his book Work After Globalization, which was written in 2009. The next one was The Precariat, 2011. And basically, like he would say, we're basically facing a perfect storm. You got the stagnant wages, neoliberalism moving to rentier capitalism, which is what we have now, which is like I literally woke up to the place below me being ripped up in my apartment, going like this because of how like they're going to gut that one, and then they're going to turn it around and make it over 2,000. Jobs are not what they were. Wages are not what they were. There is a lot of like work that can be done online, but a lot of people don't know how to do that stuff. Meanwhile, at the same time, it was either David Shapiro or Sam Altman saying how we're going to get to a point where you could create a bot that could create a corporation that could create you money and create other bots to do the same thing. So we're in a world where there's tons of actual resources there, but people can't access them unless they know exactly how to do that. And then you have these like bits and pieces kind of lives of the precariat in which disabled people are in there, the people wishing for a lost past are in there, and the people that are coming out of college going, what happened? Like, it's not the same, like I'm turning 50 next month. It's not the same working world I entered in 1992, and it's goofy to pretend it is. Like, you could have a normal job, one job, 40 hours a week, and live on that. It could be anything, and you could do that. You had benefits, like as Neil can say, that you could live on, and then above that, like it's like, I mean, I was very lucky. I grew up in a normal middle class house, both parents. It wasn't like because of that I was like, why do anything? Like it's crazy. Meanwhile, at the exact same time, the reason I've been very busy and I've not been able to come on here as much is because I've had this crazy idea. I'm a former filmmaker of doing a scripted film on what happened with the basic income experiment in Madhya Pradesh from 2010 to 2013 with Guy Standing, Sarath Davila, and everyone else. And there is so much that happens when you invest in a community, even the small amount that they did of the basic income that they had, where like there is so many things that improved in those communities. I can't actually list them all. There's like Guy and Sarath would come back to a community and it was like night and day. And there's like, we only gave them like the equivalent of like $5 a month, but there was so many network effects and feedback effects and people going, I'll work with you on this thing, and let's work on that thing, and so forth, because people could combine their money, so they wouldn't have to go to a moneylender, and like education improving, education especially for girls improved.
Right.
It's like if you can get people above poverty, like Cheryl was saying, all these other things start coming. Like it's like your bandwidth increases, and then you can start looking at all these. Wait a minute, I can make money if I do this. I can do this thing over here. But it's getting people out of like where they're drowning, so they can actually breathe, and then go and like, okay, now I can do something. And that was what happened with the LA pilot. They actually called it breathe, because the most common statement from people in the Mayors for Guaranteed Income series of pilots was that the feeling of breathing space, the feeling of improved mental health, the feeling of being able, like, I feel like I have control of my future now, even though it's a small amount. Like most of them aren't even up to 1,000 US or whatever.
That's very interesting, Tom, because that'll be like on my Monday segment. I'm going to be talking about health, so it kind of interlines right into that, because it's like, and that will have a huge impact. Is you get people up to a level, a standard level of living. Now they've got options where they can now look at other options. What would they like to do? What can they do? And build from that point on. I'm going to quickly jump over to Ellen, I know, and then over to Minnie, because I know Minnie's you've got your hand up here.
Yeah, but my hand's been up for so long because of Cheryl mentioning about clawbacks and wondering where the tax money goes.
All right, okay, well, I'll go over to you first, and Minnie first, and then over to you, Ellen. Sorry about that, Ellen.
And the Auditor General report says the word overpayment 71 times. And then there's overpayment because the recipients are deceased and they took too long to get it, or they took too long to verify eligibility. Like the reports say how much money they collected. It said $56 million in the report. Wow. So it's not like they're not reporting how much, they know how much money is coming from it. They just don't tell you where it went after they collected it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Is that federal?
Because I can find the things from 2019. So if I can find the document on the internet, and I'm supposed to be a broke, like borderline homeless ODSP recipient, but I know more information about it because a few Google searches and keywords.
Yeah.
Like, how can I'm not supposed to know anything of this information. Like, I'm supposed to be in the dark, miserable, in a corner, in a line at a food bank. That's where I'm supposed to be. It's because nobody's asking the information. Like the Auditor General did a report, then they did a follow-up. I read the follow-up. It's 600 pages. It's 60 pages, 600 pages of the policy and the directive. People are not asking questions from the policy that they created. Nobody's asking, how is this implemented? Where does it go? How does it affect people? Nobody's doing follow-up on the emotional impact of financial abuse in the system. Nobody's doing that. Like, we know financial economic abuse is a thing, but nobody's actually saying it's actually in social assistance.
Wow.
Especially like when I got on social assistance, I was held captive in Toronto and welfare gave me $500. They didn't find me housing. They gave me $500 and sent me back to my abuser. And then after I left him, I got victims compensation. Then I got on ODSP. The entire system did nothing for me.
You hear about that a lot, actually. It's not just.
And it's not like I could go, find a lawyer and sue him. Rocco Galati, I was trying to work with him, but he's too expensive. And it's an emotionally draining to build a case, sue the government for the emotional abuse they do to you, and then you have to work. So even though I'm fighting the government, I'm doing all the things, I have prescriptions, I have medications, I have doctor's appointments, I have to pay $286 on prescriptions right now. And then find an insurance coverage that will cover it more than ODSP, because ODSP won't cover half my prescriptions. All those things that we have in a system they want to reduce and eliminate barriers back to employment, but they're causing a psychological damage on top of it, and they don't acknowledge it at all.
I heard some news today that apparently an agreement has been met with the federal government for the pharmacare plan with the Jagmeet Singh,
which will never cover any of my prescriptions. I looked at it. They want to cover birth control and diabetes medication. None of my medications are going to be covered.
Oh, okay.
Same thing with the dental plan that's coming out in June. It's not going to be covered. If I get it, they either choose that or ODSP. If I get a private plan, they choose the private plan over the government plan.
Yeah, I was gonna say because I have
Interesting.
It's
like,
like it's
like work is like, it's
they're
the same
rolling
thing
out things, but they're purposely keeping you poor to access them.
Yeah.
Oh.
They're making you choose, make money for yourself or stay poor and depend on us, and we give you scraps that we can think of.
Yeah.
I'm tired of breadcrumbs. I'm tired. I can't live on breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
Like I'm intelligent enough to understand what they're doing and make choices for myself that I don't need another person to make choices for me. But the choices that they're giving me, they make me hate them even more.
Yeah.
I'm 39. I still got 50, 40 years left on this planet, and I don't like this government at all.
Yeah.
That's exactly thank you on that, Minnie. I'm going to turn the mic over to you, Alan.
Yeah, I was just saying the policies, it's interesting. All the little caveats. Like if you don't ask or even bring anything up. And when you do, like I went to ODSP because I couldn't reach my worker because I was getting errors on the portal. And what I was really asking about is there any way I can get a mattress covered, because it doesn't really matter, but that's what I was in there for. And as soon as I started asking questions, the lady behind the counter is like, "Oh, you don't have to worry about those things. They don't apply to you." And this is the blanket. This is the blanket reply. Don't ask questions because we don't want to waste our time trying to explain it. Just go with the flow and go away. That's
Yeah.
And the reason
you're next, Cheryl.
The reason I'm so adamant about a UBI is the autonomy of it. I want to be able to go, hey, if I want to do a photography project, like film people who are unhoused, that are on disabilities, that don't have the supports, they can't get the apartment because they can't get this, so they're caught in that double-edged sword. If I want to be able to do that coast to coast, if I have a UBI, I can do those things, but because ODSP makes it so punitive, I can't even leave my problem.
We're assuming UBI will let us do those things, but we already have things in place that stop us from doing things. The same government we're asking to make UBI is the same government who can make rules to take it back.
Right.
That is true. I'm just like, it's just the digital ankle bracelet that social assistance brings, and I think more so the stigma of things like ODSP. At least with the basic income, you can say, I'm a self-employed photographer, and I use the basic income to give me a bit of a floor below my feet. It's much easier in a social situation to say, hey, I can at least hold my head up and go on a dating site. Because right now I don't even bother dating, because as soon as I mention I rely on ODSP as my ground floor below my feet, I'm ghosted. That's it. I could be we could be like completely connecting, and as soon as ODSP comes up or a disability, that's it. It's over. They're gone. Before I even have a chance for me to show I'm a person before. So
thanks
that's
for
kind of
me, Alan. Yeah, definitely. There's so many hurdles.
It's not even about the money anymore. I'm getting to the point where it's a stigma.
It is stigma. It is totally.
And the stigma affects like, I go for a job interview, everything's going peachy up to the point where the employer goes, so what are you doing for an income? And they trap you into these answers where you are, it's like a book. Well, if you want to go down the hallway, turn to page 44. If you want to go up the stairs, turn to page 52. And the employees ask you these very divisive questions to trap you into only to one kind of answer or the other. So as soon as you bring up that, yeah, I'm on ODSP, even though your resume says that you just finished a 5-year job at a restaurant,
Right.
as soon as you mention, even if you still currently have that job, right? Like, hey, I'm currently at this Swiss Chalet in Niagara, but I'm moving to Kingston.
Right.
So I'm looking for work in my city because obviously I can't drive back to Niagara every week, right? As soon as the word disability comes up,
it's like,
and you're part-time, they shut the interview down and they look at you like you've got some leprosy.
Right. That's not right. You know, it's discrimination. It's
it's everywhere.
Yeah.
That's the sad part.
Yeah. I'm going to pass the mic over to Cheryl. Your input on this, Cheryl. Definitely these stories that we're hearing. It's definitely it's something. I mean, I hear a lot of these things around my neighborhood too. And I think people just want to have hope, right? And that's the key is when the sun shines, it brightens the day. But at the same time, that's only temporary when the sun shines. It's what will boost people up to above that poverty level so that they will be successful in they can do other things. And then so many people have so many other talents and ambitions that they want to explore, but they can't when they're suppressed down.
Exactly. It's actually less expensive as a society for us to have a government that we make commit to a universal basic income. Healthcare costs come down. Policing costs come down, all kinds of other issues, they come down when you deal with the person, when you put people first. Increasingly over time, we have hyper-partisan, and the reason it's hyper-partisan governance is because of capitalism that's been allowed to become hyper. It's this beast that we can't feed. We never had, I'm older than some of you here, but, and Tom, you were mentioning about universal basic income. Our Fort government in Ontario tossed a pilot project that would have given us so much good research and example, and he just pulled that out. Luckily, we do have the internet. As Minnie is saying, we can research and see other jurisdictions that have proof. If you want evidence-based decision-making in your government, we can do, just like pharmacare. When it's been reported to death, we know it should be implemented with a universal healthcare system, but I'm digressing. The point of this hyper-capitalism is, look at the feedback, the way that our corporate structure is now. It's it's removed local news. It's removed news making and journalism. It's all corporate. You hear the social media messages that are marketed by hyper capitalist corporate agenda political parties now. That's what you hear. And they all pit people against each other and make you afraid or vilify someone who is suggesting something that would be a social program or taking care of society, which is what government is supposed to do. Government isn't a set of Lego blocks. It's people. We put people in place to govern that way. But when you have that as a priority, you are vilified in a way that makes people afraid. And I know, because as a lot of you know, I was a member of parliament in the NDP caucus. You get called scary communist, because you have evidence that is suggesting that if you put people first, it's actually more efficient for a government. to do that. But going back to something Neil said about CEOs and how much they're making, we have never, ever in the history of recorded history, we've never had this kind of gap and the kind of excess that we have now, the excess of a corporate class and the amassed billions and trillions now. People are becoming trillionaires. The amassed wealth at one end and the destitution at another end. We've never had such a huge gap.
It's like the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah. So, but you could put laws in place. There are ways we could do this.
Okay.
You could have a profit. You could have after this much profit. Now you're paying this much tax on your profit. We've never dealt with mega corporations before. We have some of the old archaic rules for capitalism, even for trade, free trade. I get how civilization started, but we're using these same archaic rules, and we're not applying a new set of rules for the mega, for this mega corporation. Look at the feedback. Do you know, like, I'm thinking not just Google, but Google, Netflix. I'm trying to think of big names that people know. They do not
Microsoft.
Amazon, of course.
They do not pay 1 cent in tax.
BlackRock and Vanguard own so much now.
But it's also because majority of these corporations are U.S. based. The U.S. tax code is bigger than the Canadian tax code.
We could put a tax code here. All of that could be done. But it also goes back to that precarious work. It's created the precarious work. I live where I live in southwestern Ontario, like in the automotive capital, where you can work in a factory and be a middle class person. You work in one of the big three, and you can make this money. Then we had all kinds of things happen with free trade agreements, federal government subsidies. We had people that were taken to court in the labor movement because they had a picket line and were stopping one large corporation called NEMAC that took Canadian dollars to build machinery, then close the plant here and move the machinery to Mexico. Because there were no stipulations in the money stopping that from happening. The other thing is, I wanted to say, I worked at a food processing plant in my town, Green Giant at the time, a label for Green Giant. It's called something else now. But I was able to work there full time in the pack, it was called, in the summer, and buy a car. A beater car, mind you, but I could buy a car, pay my car insurance, pay my own university tuition. Now, you can't do that now, not only because the wages don't match if you work full-time in the summer, but because you're not allowed to. You're only allowed 28 hours. You're not allowed full-time. So there's all these other factors. Never, when I was young as some of you guys are here, I think Minnie mentioned her age. I'm 62. We never had this term working poor. Working poor is a thing. I don't know how, Tom, maybe you know. How many years ago did working poor start?
Yeah, I remember it I remember in early 2000s somewhere I started hearing people saying, I have a second job or my boyfriend won't get a third job. And I'm just like, what the hell is this? Like, that's why I glued to Guy so directly, because he started talking about the precariat and how it's more than just like the insecure jobs. It's also the sanctioning, the situation that's being built where we have this lack of trust. I wrote a thing called Tragedy of Trust, which is one of the reasons we can't get into a UBI in the first place is because we have this lack of trust. It's been built up, by all this crap. I'm going to jump in. One more thing I wanted to add too, that you're talking about that tragedy of trust. That's exactly the phenomenon. We do not have trust in government, and it's calculated when they make these decisions to do something. They're set up to fail, so we won't trust them. A program that is rolled out by half measure
or something like recently that's happening in Ontario, in a huge social service crisis, whether you're talking about education or healthcare. Now it's Service Ontario. Okay, this is where you go for your driver's license. Who else lives? I don't know how many of you all live in Ontario, but they just unilaterally gave a contract to a mega corporation, two mega corporations based in the United States, Staples, and I think Walmart. They're gonna do Service Ontario for us.
Oh my. Oh.
And
wow.
Then we are respectful when you expect a service, say you're a middle class taxpayer, voter, whatever, right? Now you have that undermined trust. Again, because it's another half measure. It's set up to fail.
Yeah.
It's highly problematic because what it does for advocates like us is it makes it that much harder to wave and get attention and say, wait, you have people living below poverty. You have policies and regulations that don't make sense. You need to tweak this, this, and this to make this more efficient. It's too big of a distraction for them. It's like a nuisance fly around my face. That's how they take it. When we've got these
working
issues.
Poor demographic, I grew up that way. My parents, before my mom's a nurse, my grandma's a nurse, and then my dad working at TTC, they had 4 jobs. I never saw my parents. I didn't have mom and dad raising me until I left home at 18. So I always heard them hate about the government. The only time they liked the government when the Trudeau let him in the 70s. That's it.
Yeah.
That was it. And then because my uncle was deaf, he had to get on disability, so he did. But he was working. Like, we weren't allowed to just sit around and collect our disability. We had to work. It wasn't believed you had a disability in my household. So like each family household, depending on what generation they came to the country, we came in with certain house values that the other kids didn't have. So me being a black kid in a white school from kindergarten to high school, we're constantly separated. No, we're not separated just because of politics. We're separated because what year did you come into the country? And then when you go home, if I learned something at school and my family didn't like it, I couldn't talk about it again. So if my kids are like in a certain trend or a certain environment, kids going to the cottage, I have no idea what we call it white people things. There's a certain, the amount of racism that you have in your household. My mom doesn't like Indian households because 8 of them live in one household or 10 of them live in one household. Or like white kids going to the cottage in the summer, or they actually go to a tropical island and go to a resort. That's not allowed for us. We go to grandma's house. So, and then they wouldn't make a certain income too high to pay more taxes. So I learned that you don't make over $80,000 a year because you pay more taxes. So while they're working multiple jobs, they're literally pinching how much income it is, so they're not paying more taxes.
Our tax code, our tax regulations need to be updated too, because someone who's making, and there are people who do that are making millions of dollars annually, and they're paying the same taxes as somebody who's making, they're on the same tax rate as somebody who's making like 240,000.
Oh, wow.
Like our tax code needs to be like at $1 million, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 mil. Like, I'm trying to make it sound reasonable. Like, we're not just trying to tax.
Or even in chunks of 5.
Right.
There's all these loopholes and you get these credits. Well, in a lot of cases, like the credit, especially if you're a small business person who is middle class, like you have to make so much money for a tax credit if it's not refundable, right? Yeah. If it's not a refundable tax credit, it's only advantaging a certain level of people. But the interesting thing that does is, just like our discussion has evolved or devolved here, it divides people that are the bigger power when it comes to voting. Okay. It divides those people so that it protects that upper echelon always, always, always. They're always protected because we're distracted. And I don't mean distracted in a demeaning way, like I did about the fly kind of thing. That's how they think of us. But for us, it's it's all consuming though, because you try to advocate, try to get politically involved as an activist, like I have and how you have. I know how you spend so much time doing research, learning your facts, understanding how it all works. You have to dedicate so much to that, only to find out it's futile. Some people do this for years and years. I know, like, people that cry in frustration, and sometimes you get these derogatory comments, especially on different social media, you know, and the suck it up buttercup kind of stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
People care so much about not just other people and the plight of other people, but they care so much about how much they've invested of themselves into being optimistic and believing that a change can happen if only we do it right. This is why so many people, literally, like researchers, academics, literally cried when that pilot project was canceled by the Ford government. Like, they did that. You can just get worked up thinking about it now, because the work that goes into it, and like people living with disability and the advocacy, and then to find the wording that in the Accessible Canada Act, that's when I was the critic for people living with disabilities, and what got me involved with this podcast and with Brent.
Yeah.
Just the work to get, can you at least use the United Nations definition of disability? We're supposed to be signatories to the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, and we fall short. We don't do, like, so you can see why it, and then you pass the torch on to somebody else because people get exhausted and they burn out, and you have to start from scratch. Someone else has to come in and learn, just like if you're an advocate in ODSP, they learn for themselves what the hell happens, right?
Yeah, you know, and that, it kind of comes down to like earnings exemptions. Like in BC, you know, you can only earn so much, and you know, then you go to an employer, and I mean, I can look back at like relate to, like, say way back working at a big corporation, you work 40 hours a week, you get your break taken off, so you get like 37.5 hours, right? 5 days a week. Yeah, and you know, you could actually make a living way back in the 90s on that, no problem. Then as time went on, the buying power, you just eroded away from it. Then the employers, they say, well, the big corporations say, well, yeah, how can we save a buck? So then they want to get rid of you know, a lot of their full-time people, downsize down to part-timers, you know, contract in other people, and then, you know, it's a whole blossom situation. But then it comes down to the government saying, well, you can only work excess hours, because if you work more, we're going to claw that off you. So now if you take taxes off, now you say, well, what the heck? So, you know, you tell the employer, well, I can only work X amount of hours because otherwise it gets clawed off you. And then the employer thinks, well, you just don't want to work. Well, no, it's not. That's not it, right? You want to be self-sufficient. But then, of course, then you look at it and say, well, what are you able to do? What are you not able to do? You work with your disability to basically the best way you can. And so my view is it's always better if a person can, to be self-sufficient and like work, but, you know, work for themselves if you can. But again, it comes down to kind of what Minnie was saying before. It's now you have to basically indicate to be self-employed. You have to now let the government understand that, hey, working for yourself, it's still employment, but it's like you are the employee, but you're working for yourself, but you're working for the company. So it's in legislation, it's trying to make the workers understand that it is still employment. It's not unearned income. And so a lot of them are trained. They don't want to read outside that box. It's like, well, no. So you have to kind of teach them. And it's almost like schooling the workers on how to do their job.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
And the other thing that happens, I know too, as an advocate, and especially when we're working on the Accessible Canada Act, and then the language and what happened later with trying to introduce a Canada Disability benefit, there's a really high frustration level as well, and it's a very a group that suffers in silence, that they're trying not to suffer in silence, they're trying to be heard. Why do you keep concentrating on working disability?
That key word.
Why are you not talking about people with disabilities? If you can work, you can negotiate through that, but we're like the working aspect of it is a distraction from the plight of people living with disabilities, and many can't work. Many cannot collect the Canada the CPPD. They didn't work long enough to contribute to it. There's so many people that are exempt from programs that we use right now. And there's not a lot of we don't have a lot in actually federally either. And that was I had a private members bill that was the comment was made that it's not a practical solution. My private members bill was to be able to have a one-stop shop, so that you apply once federally, and whatever you're eligible for, it's an automatic.
That's the thing too, Cheryl. It's like once you have a disability, whatever province you're in, like you should automatically get federal or whatever it is. Like you should have to reapply again and again, and then every 5 years have to be reapplied, because now there's a doctor shortage too.
You have to, And I mean, and I know when we learn, I understand when you're doing something new, when you're at the vanguard of policy and trying to embrace new, I get how it has to be incremental, but you can start with people. We can identify certain conditions or like, why do you have to reprove it? Like,
and I remember a time, I mean, this is going back, and I have mentioned on my podcast before, and Neil knows the story, and all of them on the podcast here. It's where, and I'm not doing a blame game on certain governments, right? But I remember one time an administration that was in, they wanted people to go through a reassessment to see if you were still disabled, and it was all about trying to save a buck for the government. And I thought, my doctor was so mad with me, and it's like, Brent, you're wasting my time as a physician. He goes, I'm a surgeon. I'm actually a doctor in the clinic here. I don't have time for this BS. I go, I don't know. They just told me to come in. So anyway, long story short, I mean,
think about that dollar. Think about that dollar, but don't think about the dollar that it took for the person, whether you're like offering someone gas money to drive you here. We have neighborhood Facebook groups where people help each other and do that, which is wonderful. But the problem is, as I mentioned, where I live, and it is a problem when you are in a car-centric community, like your public transit is not really up to par. And think about how hard that is for people to have to go through that. You'd think the practicality of, I know, sometimes to me, and we did politicize at one time in Ontario the common sense. So I don't say common sense anymore. But but it there are some very obvious things that you'd think, okay, this is the low-hanging fruit, and why are we not implementing these things? And if you're afraid to implement something, introduce it as a pilot. Take the academic approach. Say, we're going to do this for 18 months, and let's see what happens. We'll get a report back. I mean, we don't right now. We maybe as citizens that are trying to be informed read an Auditor General's report, but we don't hold a government, like governments are not obligated to look at any of these and implement change, you know. That's the political will, and which becomes, that political will becomes partisan politics, which has become this very hyper partisan game. It's very, very difficult now to foresee how you get anything done unless you're doing it at this grassroots level and appealing to a mainstream all across the spectrum. And that's, I think, the biggest hurtful thing, not to put words in all your mouths, but that's the biggest hurtful thing. Is this not a mainstream Canadian value, at least? Like, you have vulnerable people that you're just letting the, you know, every day on a calendar gets ticked off, and you just, well, we're doing this. We have these bureaucratic processes, blah, 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 or different words that actually mean nothing. And it goes back to that, just the headlines and the social media and the gesture politics, right?
One thing that I've noticed before I hand the mic over to Tom and then over to Ellen, I've noticed that none of the media, Cheryl, I don't know if you've noticed that out in Ontario, but none of the media, doesn't matter what station it is, they talk about seniors, but they never talk about people with disabilities. Like, very rarely will they mention that at all. And I mean, there's seniors who have disabilities that are suffering, and that's another quick topic. Just before Tom, before I reach over to you, it's I mean, like, and I want to really focus a lot of the podcast going forward to kind of FYI me on this. It's that bringing the attention to seniors who have disabilities, like when they turn 65, they lose their disability status, but they still have their disabilities, but they don't get all the benefits that go with it. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and then over to you, Tom, and then I'll get Cheryl all your feedback on all this. And then
actually, I think Alan was first on this. Alan, do you want to go?
I think he.
No, go ahead, Tom.
Okay. Let's see. I wanted to add to what you were saying about the basic income pilot. One of the things I've heard our kind of one of our Canadian kind of like icons of the movement, Sheila Reguer, is the head of BICN. She, of course, formerly worked in government as well in welfare, and as she said, there was no way that the Ontario government could have taken any kind of information and processed it and used that to make a decision to cancel the pilot. Meanwhile, if they'd wanted to find out whether basic income worked or not, the best thing would have been to just let it roll out. The late Senator Hugh Segal, he said, well, yeah, it's unfortunately happened to us twice. I mean, the other time was Mincome, where it was the funding for research that was pulled. But usually, like, the challenges, as we've kind of learned in the movement, is don't start it's that thing of like starting a pilot right before there could be an election. It's like, that's kind of a dangerous. And so it was like, as Hugh said, it's like a lot of governments don't like to take on the projects of their predecessor. But it's also, I was thinking about how one of the things that Guy talks about, especially in his recent book, Politics of Time, I don't work for him or anything, but is a difference between work and labor. You see so many statements of work being put up on, like where it's like disability and inclusion, disability work, blah, 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 blah. And it's like there's a difference between, as Guy said, the difference between work and labor. Labor is a very specific thing, and it's working for a wage, whereas work can be just about anything.
Yeah, good point.
And labor is changing so much anyway, and you have David Graeber talking about bullshit jobs where 30%. What did he say? 37% of UK workers believe they have a job that doesn't need to exist. It's like we need to start, especially when you have all these other things like climate change and whatever, start moving in a direction towards like, okay, what labor do we need? And and start valuing people as opposed to valuing jobs first. So that was really
yeah. Thanks on that, Tom.
Cheers.
Over to you, Alan.
I'm not gonna rabble on too much. One thing though that Tom mentioned was interesting. I watched two individuals this week on TikTok, I think it was, or someone sent them to me. I was able to save one. I didn't have the authorization to save the other video clip. Sometimes you can. One guy was working for a corporation. He's bragging on how they can use all these government subsidies so that they can hire immigrants, which they charge to bring over, and they give them the job. So instead of paying me $16 an hour to flip a dish at a restaurant or that's owned by a corporation like Swiss Chalet, is under the same umbrella as Montana's and Harvey's and Kelsey's, I think.
Yeah,
they can pay some guy from India to do that same job for 10 an hour.
Right. Contract out.
There's this. We've got into this employment farming. We're not just up against AI replacing that job where it's like a factory, and now there are 3 robots doing a job of 30 people, or whatever. We're dealing with government on all levels bringing people in from the economy to boost the GDP or whatever it is, and then we're giving them the jobs that Canadians are needing, whether it's to pump gas at a gas station or work in the quick store, convenient cash and grab store, or whatever it is.
Right.
And instead of paying them $16 an hour, we're paying them 10. And then there was a guy I was able to save, and I think I posted him in my story, and he was talking about the same thing. So I had one guy from a business crate basically bragging how they're making profits on taking Canadian jobs because it's cheaper to get some guy from Africa, from Zimbabwe or whatever, to come over and charge him a ton, make him work it off. I'm like, oh my God.
It's kind of like what Neil was talking about the RBC at the time, right? It's
outsourcing,
outsourcing, and that's it's very unfortunate that.
So we're not just outsourcing companies to Mexico. We're outsourcing employees.
Well, we're outsourcing the
come
birth
to
rate.
Canada.
It's not. We're outsourcing the birth rate. There's more Canadians not having babies, so they bring in immigrants who have all the babies.
That's true too.
My floor, the amount of kids on my floor, my building is majority Filipino and Somalian. It wasn't like that before, but the amount of kids running up and down the floor and strollers in the elevator, we're bringing in other, and part of the reason we're bringing in immigrants, they don't know what's wrong with our country.
Okay.
So they work hard to come here. And their family sponsors them because my aunts and uncles have to be sponsored by other aunts and uncles, and then other people are coming in. They're not telling them it's bad. And they're they're not telling them what's wrong with it. It's free cell phone. It's Adidas. I have the Mercedes. They're not telling them it's bad. They're sending them money. They're sending them stuff. My family packs a barrel of stuff to my family in Jamaica. My family in Jamaica have no idea that we struggle. They have no idea that I have a disability. They have no idea that I like the amount of stuff that I've been through that's horrible here. They have no idea, but they want to come here. So when they come here, we're forced to take care of them. We're forced to prove we can take care of them. If they get married, they're forced to bring their spouses over. Like this whole entire immigrant system, nobody actually talks about how bad the immigrant system is.
Well, when we do talk about it, it's to pit people against each other. If you had to treat every person, no matter where they're from, with dignity.
Dignity and respect.
They all have the same rights in the workplace, same wages. Full time, get to be permanent resident status, not beholden to an employer that hangs onto your passport and all kinds of problematic issues.
And then what we do to migrant workers. Migrant workers don't even have a good place to work, but we bring them in all the time.
That's what I'm saying very carefully. Instead of they have this and we have that, which is what is been set up so that we're divided against each other. If we all had the expectation that every single human being, no matter their ability, no matter where they're from, if they're here, the expectation is that they're all going to be treated the same way, have the same wage, have the same rights in the judicial system, have the same rights, okay? If we treated everybody the same, you would see a difference. The problem that we have is, and it goes back to that predatory capitalism of find the cheapest way to do something and amass a profit for me. I had said earlier, before we go, I want to expound on it. I had talked about excess. And I know I've talked about this before on the podcast, Brett, but for the 100th anniversary, I want to talk about it and try and get this concept popularized for people, because it benefits everybody when we all have a real social comeuppance about the issue of access versus excess.
Okay.
And when we all have access to our basic needs, when we all have access, then you talk about excess. If you are, I'm not saying you're not deserving of a reward if you work hard and build a company, but this great wealth that's being amassed, this excess, when someone is only worried about, and we've all seen the price tags of these things, of these high luxury lifestyles and these corporations. This corporation just bought that one to game a system, right? It's actually a game for them. And you have people that are living in encampments in your community, and in your neighborhood, you're trying to put pressure so they won't pull down an encampment. Or then you have other neighbors that pull them down, or you have debates in communities about where should we put affordable housing. And instead of that, when you commit to that idea that you've got so much excess, what it boils down to is we're capable of doing better than we are now. We're capable. It's not unrealistic to say that you can have basic access to basic needs for everyone. And
I'm seeing a shift. That's really interesting. I'm starting to see, and it's probably been the last 3 months, especially when we had the last immigrant rush of people coming over. I'm seeing people from Africa, from India, also Trinidad, all sorts of people that have come over, now saying on social media, don't come to Canada. We got scooped. We got totally talked into something. I'm going back home as soon as I can earn. They are actually coming out and being vocal about wanting to go back home from Canada, even though they were sold a narrative that they would have a nice townhouse and all this. They're going. There was a guy from Africa, Nigeria, and he's like, people don't come to Canada. I'm paying $1,000 to sleep in a room with 10 other people with dividers because that landlord can do it. It's really scary.
Oh, go ahead, Neil.
Alan, Alan, what you're talking about, I think, is a lot, and it is happening because it is a younger generation that is speaking out. And here, so it started with the conservative government, then the liberals followed. We reduced the funding to universities drastically. Kept doing it. So we reduced the funding.
We also propped up private schools too.
But at the same time, we reduced the funding to universities. We lifted the cap on how many international students every institution can take, including private institutions. Okay. So you have places with, private universities, And it's going back to like Minnie was saying about people not really knowing how bad it is here. We have a Canada brand that's still held in high esteem. Someone is reading this and they're home and they've worked their whole life and they say, okay, we're going to send Junior to this college in Canada.
Toronto.
Look at what they're doing for us. And they trust it, right?
Yeah.
And then they come here, they're in Toronto, and a lot of it does fall on, I mean, we could get into all kinds of jurisdictional issues where it's stuck on the city of Toronto is in crisis with it right now, but it's happening in other cities too, of course. Whose problem is it, right? Oh, not my problem. So you're left dealing with a lot of these very profound issues. Yeah, these very profound issues are being dealt with in city council chambers.
Oh,
by people who are not.
I think Miss Chow is going to drown because of it. I have a really horrible feeling that they're going to throw her under the bus for not being able to fix this huge fluctuation into Ontario.
She's doing
she's going to fall on the sword for it. One term. And then they'll say, see what happens when you let this person into as a mayor? We need a conservative in place. And it's this game of dodgeball.
Yeah, it's like the hot potato one. Here's your turn. But rather than work together to resolve things. I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Neil.
We've reached the end of our show, but I just wanted to have a quick comment and say that, for me, like when my dad used to work for BC Tel or TELUS, and he worked for maybe 30 years and had a lot of friends that worked for 30 or 40 years for the company. And that's probably the biggest difference between then and now is that if you work for even 5 years now, or like 3 or 4 years, you're considered like a long-term employee at 3 and 4 years now. It's like, wow, you've been with a company for 3 or 4 years. Wow, you're a lifer, and that whole it's totally different now, right? I mean, so like every 4 or 5 years, people are jumping ship and doing something else because the job's gone. And I know Tom can speak about that
my dad was my dad. We have that one in common. Yours was BC Tel. My dad was BC Hydro. So was my grandfather. Yeah. And my grandfather, like I say, my dad was like, and I know that obviously, like Minnie was saying, people's situations are different. I'm a white guy, so my reality is very, very different to someone else's, like Minnie or whoever. But like my grandfather, I think he went like soldier, BC Hydro. Actually, it was BC Electric back then. My dad was like beanpacker, BC Hydro, straight through 40 years to retirement. Mm-hmm. And I think my mom, and it was like later on, my mom started working as a preschool teacher or something like that in kind of late 80s. But yeah, that was just the norm. It was like, as Guy would say, it's like the proletariat. That's what the old welfare was built on. It was built on, you had this industrial thing and you had a welfare thing in case of contingency or whatever, and that's it. Yeah. Now it's all over the place. So that's why it's like, the need for basic income, and we'd have to, make sure that it locks in place. Like another thing I'm into is land value tax. The reason we don't have a land value tax, BC actually had one a long, long time ago, like 1900, but it wasn't protected from the people who definitely didn't want there to be a land value tax. So they wiped it out.
Yeah. But I want to comment on that too. There is. I had a friend of the family who way back in like the late 80s until into the early 2000s, and he worked for BC Tel, and then it became TELUS. Yeah. But I remember bumping into him like many years later after he wired up my mom's house with a bunch of, here, you want a phone jack in your room? You want one in here? Almost every single freaking room, we put a phone jack in.
That's why my apartment has 4 phone jacks.
Right. So
2 in the bedroom, there's 2 in the living room. I'm like, why is there so many?
Right.
That makes
he went ahead and he always
that explains so much.
all he said is that don't tell the telephone company, right? He says, I go, okay, that's between you and I. But anyway, I ran into him years later, and he was working at another job. And I said, well, did you quit TELUS? BC Tel? He goes, no. I still work for them. And I'm thinking, what? He goes, yeah, I need another job too to go along with it because the buying power started eroding. And I thought, wow, like what's going on here? It's kind of like when Tom told the story. Yeah, like I'd love to maybe do a like another segment, Neil, and have a continuation, one more series of this series of the 100th anniversary, and they give other people
200s in a row.
I tune holiday 100 plus. That way we kind of continue with maybe other ones, people who weren't able to join today.
Okay.
We can maybe join and celebrate the this. But we can talk about that off air, and then we can all kind of arrange that for a few minutes. I just want to give my final comments on today's segment. So anyone tuning in today, there will be a 100 plus, meaning another segment to look forward to tuning into. So if you missed a little bit of today's segment, not to worry, there'll be one more of this one. Yeah, but I want to thank
like
everyone.
A baker's dozen?
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, though. I mean, this has been a great segment. I mean, there's so much to dive into, and I look forward to having you, subscribe to the channel, like stay up to date and what's going on. And definitely, if you want to come on the show, reach out to Neil or myself. But anyway, stay tuned to the next episode of this one. On Monday, we're launching a new series. It's actually called Disability Stories Health. So it's the health topic. So how does health affect your life? Definitely send us comments in the comments section, and we'll have you on as a guest to talk about that too. If you want to be the guest on that series, reach out and we'll have you on, and then we'll have our panel kind of intertwined with you and feedback of what you have to say to us. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.